In the summer of 1942, while the German army was still advancing in the east, a lone Axis plane flew over Stalingrad. The aircraft, an Italian SM-82 trimotor, carried a secret cargo. It flew not to Berlin or Rome in the west, but east across Stalin's Russia. For thousands of miles it crossed hostile Soviet territory. Its destination was Japanese Manchuria. The plane was delivering to the Japanese plans of Italian work on jet engines.
Everyone forgets that the Italians were really far advanced in jet technology at the beginning of the war. The Japanese felt if they had that technology, they could create planes that could shoot down the B-29s that were about to arrive. And when the Japanese got that technology, they managed to build aircraft that were even more advanced than the Germans had.
Although most of these planes would never see the light of day, one plane the Japanese actually did develop with the help of the Italian technology flown from Stalingrad was the Oka, or Cherry Blossom, a rocket-powered, manned missile launched from a mother aircraft at US warships. An early but unreliable rocket-powered version was used against American ships in the Pacific, but lack of speed made it vulnerable to being shot down. "50 Okas, powered by Italian jet engines, had already been built when the war ended. They were cheap to construct, simple to use, and lethally accurate. As Japan struggled to build its secret jet and rocket planes, Germany was already heading towards defeat. By 1944, the Red Army was rolling back the grey tide of Hitler's legions on all fronts. British and American forces were fighting in Italy, and plans were afoot to land an Allied army on the French coast. Most German officers now realized that the war was lost, and some began conspiring to overthrow Hitler and seek a settlement while they still had a position to bargain from. Among those plotting treason was Albrecht Haushofer, but his father would remain loyal to the very end.
Karl supported his country, whether right or wrong. His patriotism was of an extreme kind, and he would never have acted against his own country. He was very angry with his son Albrecht for having associated with the German resistance to Hitler, because he believed that had imperiled the rest of the family.
Facing defeat, Germany and Japan increasingly turned to the creation of wonder weapons. Planes like the world's first operational jet fighter, the Messerschmitt Me-262. Japan also planned to build a version of the Me-262. It was to have been called the Karyu, or Fire Dragon.
The Fire Dragon would have flown at 200 miles an hour faster than any American fighter, faster than a Mustang, faster than a Thunderbolt, faster than a Lightning. Nothing would have caught it.
Japan also had a version of the incredible Messerschmitt Me-163. It was called Shushi, after the death stroke administered by a samurai sword. Powered by a rocket engine, the Shushi could climb in only 2.5 minutes to meet B-29s cruising 5 miles high. It flew at 600 miles per hour and was armed with 2 30mm cannon. Even more advanced Japanese jet projects were developed from the plans delivered by the Italians. There was the Imperial Navy's Kika, meaning Mandarin orange blossom. Like the Oka, the Kika was designed to attack ships of the expected American invasion fleet. Similar in shape to the successful German Me-262, but smaller, the Kikka had folding wings to allow it to be hidden safe from American bombing. The Navy ordered 200. Most amazing of all was the Kyushu J-7W Shinden interceptor fighter. This was the Japanese Imperial Navy's ultimate reply to the deadly B-29.
The Shinden means magnificent lightning. Many experts have thought that Japanese technology was inferior to the Allies or the Germans, but in this case the Shinden was superior to much that was around at that time.
With its revolutionary rear-mounted swept wings and turbojet, the Shinden was one of the most advanced aircraft projects produced by any country during the Second World War.
The early jet engines used during the Second World War had a particular problem, which the Japanese, with their typical engineering simplicity, managed to resolve. You see, you need to put a single jet engine in the middle of the plane to maintain the center of gravity. If you do that, the hot gases that exhaust out the end of the jet engine have a bad habit of melting the aircraft unless you have the right metal alloys.
To avoid this problem, early jet engines were hung in pairs, one under each wing, making the plane too heavy. The Shinden overcame this problem by mounting the engine in the tail and reversing the normal aerodynamic configuration, putting the wings at the rear and balancing the plane by putting the control surfaces at the front. This revolutionary shape is called a canard wing. This back-to-front wing was test-flown on a glider in 1943. Design of the fighter version was started in earnest in June 1944, as the threat from the first B-29 raids became real. The first prototype, powered by a conventional prop engine, was ready in 10 months. The first test flight was on the 3rd of August 1945. In combat, the jet version of the Shinden would have been armed with 4 30mm cannon or air-to-air missiles.
In World War II, the Americans lost only 148 B-29s from enemy action. But if the Japanese had managed to deploy aircraft like the Shindens, they'd have lost hundreds more.
The prototype Shindens were discovered by the American Army after Japan's surrender. They were taken to the United States and studied rigorously. The last one can still be found in the National Air and Space Museum in Washington. The Japanese found it very difficult to destroy the high-flying US bombers because their planes did not work very well at extreme altitudes. Even when the Americans switched to carpet bombing with napalm at lower altitudes, the Japanese lacked the anti-aircraft guns, radar, and planes to do much damage. But a couple of hundred jet Shindens would have stopped the Americans firebombing Tokyo.
By 1945, Japanese rocket and jet technology was actually in advance of the United States. Had they deployed that technology, they could have met the American forces as equals.
Yet there was one Japanese plane above all others that would have dramatically impacted on the course of World War II. The most closely kept secret of the Japanese aviation development was a revolutionary intercontinental bomber designed to hit US cities from bases in Japan. Called the Nakajima G10N1 Fugaku, or Mount Fuji, the traditional symbol of Japan. The Fugaku was to be powered by 6 Nakajima KK-11 engines, each generating 5,000 horsepower. It was designed to cruise at an altitude of 32,000 feet at a speed of 423 miles per hour, faster than most standard US fighters. And it was protected by 4 20mm cannon. Where Japan had got the technology from led back to Karl Haushofer and the Black Dragon Society. Throughout the 1930s, Japanese businessmen, many of them linked to the secretive Black Dragons, operated in the United States. Using funds generated by the heroin trade in China, the Japanese purchased American technology, including aircraft, through legal channels. In 1938, the Japanese Imperial Navy used a front company to buy the plans to manufacture the Douglas DC-3 transport.
A Black Dragon front company operating in the United States called the Mitsui Company actually managed to buy the entire plans for the Douglas DC-3 for a mere $90,000.
In 1939, the Japanese legally bought another Douglas transport, the bigger DC-4E prototype. At last they had access to the most advanced four-engine long-range aircraft that America could produce.
From the DC-4 and the DC-4 plans, the Japanese were able to build a prototype long-range bomber called the Shinzan, which actually means mountain valley. It wasn't a terribly good aircraft when they actually got it built. It was underpowered, but it did give them the technology in order to build the Fugaku bomber later on in the war. The Japanese also bought other US aircraft technology, the Lockheed LO, the North American N-16, Seversky fighters, Douglas flying boats. This way, the secrets of US aircraft technology were actually embodied in the Japanese fighting machine that America faced during the Pacific War.
But Japan was not finished. In March of 1939, representatives of the Mitsubishi Company met with executives of Boeing at a plant in Seattle. They discussed buying the plans for the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress. Failing that, they wanted Boeing to design a Japanese bomber based on B-17 technology. Boeing said it was not possible politically to design the Japanese bomber on company premises, but a hotel or nearby office could be used by the Japanese to produce a joint design. Boeing then said it would need government permission to manufacture it. But World War II broke out, and the plans came to nothing.
It was through its commercial contacts that the Japanese were able to build up their bomber technology. In fact, the Fugaku betrays its origins in the DC-4 and even the B-17. But the Japanese had taken this technology a generation forward. They were now building an intercontinental bomber.
The range of the Fugaku was an incredible 9,000 miles. This would have allowed it to attack cities on the American west coast and return safely to the home islands. But so much fuel would have been needed the Fugaku probably could not have carried a worthwhile bomb load. Here in remote Manchuria, as World War II drew to its close, lay the last great secret of the Axis. A weapon so awesome, it could have saved the Axis from the doom long ago prophesied by the Haushofers. But as this weapon was being perfected, the Haushofers made one last attempt to determine the course of history.
The July 1944 bomb plot to assassinate Adolf Hitler was the most serious attempt to kill him during his entire period as Nazi Führer. And it came closest, but by a bizarre stroke of luck, the bomb was placed on the other side of a table. It was a very strong oak table, and the blast went upwards, killing people around Hitler, but he walked away.
The bomb had been planted by a senior German officer, Klaus von Stauffenberg, who was part of a larger conspiracy to install a civilian government in Germany and seek peace terms with the Allies. Amongst the conspirators was Albrecht Haushofer. Hitler ordered the arrest of everyone remotely connected with the failed coup. Karl Haushofer, who was probably not a part of the plot, was also arrested. He was sent to Dachau concentration camp. Albrecht Haushofer escaped to the mountains of his native Bavaria. He avoided capture till the following December, when a chance Gestapo patrol noticed smoke coming from his hayloft hiding place. He was taken to Himmler's Gestapo headquarters in Berlin. Most of the conspirators in the July plot against Hitler's life were hung using piano wire. But not the Haushofers. They remained in prison.
By the end of 1944, Heinrich Himmler realized the war was going to be lost. He decided to keep both the Haushofers alive as negotiating tools with the Americans and the Allies in the West. Essentially, he wanted them to save his own skin.
Although the Japanese saw that the war for Germany was over, Japan was still strong. She had millions of soldiers in China. She had hoarded thousands of planes to fend off an American invasion, and new jet and rocket planes, years ahead of their time, were about to go into production.
In order to buy time, the Japanese actually reverted to Haushofer's original plan for a grand Eurasian alliance of Germany, Japan, and Russia itself. First of all, they sent the Berlin ambassador Oshima to speak to Hitler and put this to him. But Hitler, by that time, was in his phase that he was going to go down fighting, so he refused. So then the Emperor Hirohito himself sent a former Japanese Prime Minister, Koki, to speak to the Russians and put to them that Japan and Russia should fight the Americans together.
If Japan could buy time by keeping Russia from attacking her, then she had a better chance of producing the new wonder weapons like the Shinden and the Fugaku. But time was running out. On April 30th, 1945, the Russians stormed the Reichstag in Berlin. 7 days later, Nazi Germany surrendered on all fronts, and the search began for the men behind the Reich. But one man they did not find. Before the end came, Hitler had ordered the Gestapo to murder every prisoner. Only hours from liberation, Albrecht Haushofer had been taken from the Moabit prison in Berlin and shot in the back of the head.
Albrecht was shot on 23rd of April 1945 after being promised his freedom with the last remnants of the German resistance to Hitler. And when he was found, he had in his hand the sonnets of Moabit, and one of those sonnets was entitled Guilt, and in it he writes, "I'm not guilty as the judge thinks I'm guilty, but I'm guilty in another way. I spoke my warnings, but my warnings were too feeble. I know today wherein lies my guilt."
Russia finally rejected all Japan's overtures in July 1945. Japan, last of the Axis powers, was left to fight on alone. But far away from Tokyo and the home islands, in occupied Manchuria, Japan had a secret weapon that could still seize victory from the jaws of defeat. A weapon capable of mass destruction. In the summer of 1945, Japan still occupied China, the Philippines, oil-rich Indonesia, Vietnam, and Korea. The bulk of her army and air force was still intact. Many in Asia saw her as a fighter against the return of white colonialism. Invading the Japanese home islands would cost hundreds of thousands of Allied dead. Japan was by no means defeated. Deep in Manchuria, Japan had developed a weapon of mass destruction no other nation yet possessed. A weapon she could use to attack the continental United States. This weapon had been created by Unit 731, the brainchild of soldier scientist General Shiro Ishii. Ishii was born in 1892 in the village of Kamo, east of Tokyo. The son of a rich feudal landowner, Ishii studied medicine and became interested in bacteriology. A fierce nationalist, he joined the army upon graduating. In April 1928, Ishii left on a 2-year research trip, visiting 30 countries. In particular, he visited Germany to study the German army's use of poison gas during the First World War. More than likely, the introductions Shiro Ishii had to the secretive German military in this period came from contacts established by Karl Haushofer. On his return to Japan, Ishii convinced the Japanese Army High Command to begin a vast research program into a form of warfare even more terrible than the use of gas: germ warfare. Ishii was promoted to major and put in charge of the project. In size and scale, it rivaled America's atomic bomb project. In 1931, the Japanese attacked and stole the vast country of Manchuria from China. Manchuria became the base for the operations of the Black Dragon Society.
The Black Dragons financed much of industry and business in Manchuria with money laundered from their control of the Chinese opium trade. It was an ideal place to build a biological warfare facility. It was remote. It was controlled by an unholy alliance of the Black Dragons and the military. Secrecy was guaranteed.
In 1938, work began on a vast research complex at Pingfan. It covered 3 square kilometers and took 2 years to build. So secret was the base that Japanese military planes were banned from flying over it. Here, Ishii set about building his biological weapons.
The purpose of their experiments was to find out which particular diseases were the most virulent when it came to military use. They tried everything, but in fact it transpired that good old-fashioned medieval bubonic plague was the worst possible disease. Just as well they were doing the experiments in remote Manchuria, because in the end Ishii managed to stockpile enough bubonic plague to wipe out the entire human race.
In bombing experiments, Ishii discovered that the fragile germ microbes perished because of strong air pressure or high temperature. What would make Shiro Ishii infamous was his solution to the delivery problem. Outside the human body, the bubonic plague germ dies, but it can be carried by the humble flea. One flea bite can transfer 24,000 plague microbes to a human being. Traditional bombing methods would have killed the fleas in the blast. After years of intensive development, Ishii made a breakthrough. What if the casing of the bombs was made of clay? It would require less charge to explode the bomb, preserving the plague-carrying fleas to spread out with their cargo of death. In 1944, a year ahead of the first secret American atomic bomb test, Ishii developed his first germ bomb. It was the world's first smart weapon. The bomb split into 2 parts. A porcelain container was slowed by a parachute. This was filled with 30,000 plague-carrying fleas and oxygen to keep them alive. A radio beacon fell to Earth first, and on contact with the ground, detonated the germ bomb at the most lethally effective altitude.
The tests proved that 80% of the bacteria carrying fleas actually survived explosions. So Ishii now knew he had a weapon, and pretty soon he was turning out plague bombs, anthrax bombs, typhoid bombs. The thing he really had to do, though, was to prove that they killed people, and this is the most appalling part of his experiments beyond the technology. He experimented on live people to prove that the weapons worked. He used Chinese peasants, captured Chinese soldiers, and in particular he used captured Allied airmen.
In the autumn of 1941, Prime Minister Tojo personally awarded Shiro Ishii with a medal for successfully attacking the Chinese army with plague at the important communications center of Chongtae. On April 18, 1942, the United States launched 16 B-25 bombers for the first American attack on Japanese soil, led by Colonel James Doolittle. The targets were Tokyo, Kobe, Nagoya, and Osaka. Damage was light. 90 buildings were destroyed and 90 Japanese killed. But Japanese pride was outraged.
The Japanese initially retaliated by attacking those parts of China, the Zhejiang region, where Doolittle's bombers had landed. But this was just the prelude to a more sinister plot which Hiroishi had sought out. The Japanese would pretend to retreat. The Chinese would then probably advance. But the Japanese would cede the ground over which the Chinese would advance with deadly biological weapons.
Detachments of biological warfare teams from Unit 731 contaminated reservoirs, rivers, and wells with germs of cholera, dysentery, typhoid, plague, and anthrax. Approximately 250,000 Chinese troops and civilians died in the revenge attacks following the Doolittle raid. Large numbers died as a result of germ warfare. But by using natural diseases, the Japanese were able to hide the true numbers.
The Japanese expended considerable efforts on developing methods of attacking the continental United States by submarine, by aircraft, by balloon. There is no doubt they could have delivered Ishii's biological weapons had they chosen. And if they had done, then perhaps hundreds of thousands of Americans would have been killed.
In the summer of 1945, Unit 731 embarked on its most dangerous operation yet, codenamed Cherry Blossoms at Night. The intention was to use the Japanese Navy's new I-400 submarine aircraft carriers. The target date was September the 22nd, 1945. The plan was to bomb San Diego with bubonic plague bombs manufactured at Unit 731.
The Japanese Army's project for using biological weapons against the United States was called Cherry Blossoms at Night. Unfortunately, the Japanese Army didn't have a delivery system ready. The Fugaku bomber was not flying yet. The alternative method for delivering these weapons was to use the Japanese Navy's secret aircraft carrier submarines, the giant I-400s. The Japanese Army and the Japanese Navy then fell out over how to use these submarines, because the Navy wanted to keep them in reserve to use for kamikaze attacks against attacking American aircraft carriers.
Fortunately for San Diego, the Navy refused to endanger their I-400s in a last-ditch attack on the USA.
Perhaps if the Japanese had publicly threatened to use their biological weapons against the United States, this would have deterred America from using its atomic weapons against Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
By 1945, the Ping Fan germ warfare factory was mass-producing bio-bombs. Japan was also working on nuclear weapons. By 1939, experiments in Europe had already proven that nuclear fission was possible, and that the best material to use was uranium. The Black Dragon industrial empire in Korea and Manchuria gave Japan access to uranium oxides.
Manchuria is rich in all kinds of minerals, and a leading member of the Black Dragons called Kodama Yoshi was recruited to supply these minerals to Japan's war factories. Kodama ended up making a fortune.
An American atomic bomb ended the Second World War. While the Allies rushed ahead with the Manhattan Project, the Japanese had already decided by 1943 that an atomic bomb was theoretically possible. But perhaps because they were so far ahead in biological warfare, they decided that nuclear weapons would take too long to develop. Nuclear research had remained a low priority.
After Hiroshima, senior Japanese military like Ishii realized the war was lost. Rather than use the biological weapons, Ishii decided that he could trade their secrets to the Americans for immunity. So Ishii and the staff at Unit 731 escaped prosecution after the war. In fact, Ishii himself became a senior advisor to the United States military on biological and chemical weapons.
On April 7, 1987, the Japanese government at last admitted the existence of Unit 731. It also admitted that Shiro Ishii, godfather of Japan's biological warfare project, had been paid a pension for his work. He died on the 9th of October 1959, aged 67. But Shiro Ishii's biological plagues did not die. Even 60 years on, Ishii's enhanced varieties of bubonic plague ravaged parts of China. Today, the relatives of the victims of these attacks are still trying to claim compensation from Japanese courts. Meanwhile, in Europe, when the end result of the Nazi racial theories of an Aryan super race were discovered, the leading Nazis like Rudolf Hess and Karl Haushofer were called to account. In 1946, the Allies put Nazi leaders on trial at Nuremberg. Among those in the dock was Rudolf Hess. He was brought back from prison in England and put on trial for his life. Karl Haushofer had been liberated from a Nazi concentration camp in 1945, but did not slip away unnoticed. Hitler's Merlin, the brains behind Mein Kampf, and the architect of the Axis Pact, was brought to Nuremberg to confront Hess by none other than his old adversary, Father Edmund Walsh.
After the war, the Reverend Edmund Walsh saw Karl Haushofer on behalf of the American Armed Services. And the Reverend Edmund Walsh decided he should not be prosecuted for war crimes on the grounds that his advice had been advisory and intellectual, and that he should not be prosecuted. But he did take Haushofer to Nuremberg, and Haushofer was appalled to see the destruction of the whole city. And when he was taken to see Hess, Hess refused to recognize him, claiming amnesia, that he couldn't remember.
The British later admitted that they had used mind-bending drugs, truth drugs, on Hess to try and get information out of him. It could well be that they affected his mental and physical stability. However, the Allies did think that Hess was bluffing, so they brought his old friend, Karl Haushofer, to see him, to see if that would jog his memory. Haushofer told Hess about the family, he explained about Hess's wife and son, but Hess still claimed he couldn't remember Haushofer or anybody.
Bluffing or not, Hess was found guilty of war crimes and sentenced to life imprisonment. From the dock he made an extraordinary speech. "I am happy to know that I have done my duty to my people, my duty as a German, as a National Socialist, and as a true disciple of the Führer. I regret nothing." Rudolf Hess, once Hitler's deputy, the student and protege of Karl Haushofer, spent the next 47 years in Spandau prison, the last 21 of them in solitary confinement. Other prominent Nazis like Albert Speer, who was the organizer of mass slave labor in the Reich, were eventually allowed their freedom. But Rudolf Hess was kept isolated in prison. Only since his death have new facts emerged that did not surface at the Nuremberg trials.
Winston Churchill knew that Rudolf Hess was coming to Britain, and he laid a trap for him. Aleister Crowley, the British occultist, had been recruited by the Secret Service. In fact, his controller was Ian Fleming, who later created the James Bond spy novels. Now, Fleming got Crowley to invent spurious occult predictions about Germany being taken to its doom by Adolf Hitler, and these were used to demoralize Hess and other Nazis.
Rudolf Hess, the last Nazi, was found mysteriously strangled to death in Spandau prison in August 1987. His gravestone reads, "I took the risk." Other senior Nazis found guilty at the Nuremberg trials were either hung or sentenced to long prison terms. Haushofer's friend, the German Foreign Minister Ribbentrop, was hanged, and Hermann Göring, who succeeded Hess as deputy Führer, committed suicide. In 1946, aged 75, Karl Haushofer and his wife committed suicide. His wife took poison, but he took his own life in the traditional Japanese fashion, disemboweling himself with a sharp samurai short sword, in the ceremony called seppuku.
When Karl Haushofer returned on the Ides of March, he and his wife Martha committed suicide, and he left instructions behind that no marker should go on his grave.
The end result of Karl Haushofer's theories of geopolitics and Lebensraum was destruction and carnage. The right of strong nations to conquer and exploit the lands of their weaker neighbors, combined with spurious doctrines of racial superiority, had eventually culminated in mass murder and genocide. But Karl Haushofer's influence continues. The Black Dragons, the mysterious organization which played so heavily in his plans for German domination, have become the famous Japanese organized crime syndicate known as the Yakuza.
The Yakuza are the Japanese equivalent of the Mafia. The name Yakuza means 893, the losing numbers in the Japanese version of blackjack. After World War II, Kodama Yoshi, who made millions in Manchuria, set up prostitution rackets and took over labor unions. He was eventually caught taking a $2 million bribe from Lockheed to ensure the Japanese government bought its planes.
Whatever ideals the Black Dragons might once have had perished with the Axis and Japan's plans for imperial conquest. But this unlikely alliance between the Black Dragons and Karl Haushofer could have brought about an Axis victory. If Fugaku bombers had headed across the Pacific towards San Francisco, armed with deadly biological weapons, the world might be a very different place today.
When Adolf Hitler rejected Karl Haushofer's advice, he opened the way to Lord Kitchener's prophecy coming true and America becoming a world power, indeed the only world power today. If Haushofer had had his way, the Axis would have won, and America today would probably be a German colony.
America luckily escaped the fate of Europe and Japan, and the Axis powers were defeated before they could deploy technology that might have achieved world domination. In Europe, the war had cost the lives of nearly 20 million people, half of them in concentration camps. Russia and China lost even more, about 20 million each.
It is extraordinary how the world has forgotten the importance of Karl Haushofer to the history of the 20th century. Without him, Hitler might never have captured the imagination of the German people. And there certainly would have been no Axis pact and German-Japanese alliance. I doubt Japan would have attacked America without that alliance.
Although Karl Haushofer was never brought to trial, he recognized the appalling consequences of his own ideas. The Germany that he had helped create was in ruins, and his son murdered. Karl Haushofer, keeper of the last secrets of the Axis.